Well, my experience relates to primarily adult education, which I'm going to define as adults age 25 and older returning to school for a variety of reasons, including vocational, avocational, at almost any level of the educational world, which could be elementary, secondary, higher education, trade schools, correspondence instruction, or even self-directed learning. This was not the path I was thinking I was heading, but I was a very curious person and I wanted to be in journalism, so I went to Indiana University in Bloomington and I got interested in all sorts of things, which sort of led me in a career direction and also in an educational direction. My educational experience is somewhat unusual because I have 5 college degrees. That is not the norm. I went to Indiana University in journalism because I read a lot of biographies when I was young, and one of the ones that impressed me most was the one of Joseph Pulitzer. And when I was in journalism and going through the program, I got curious about how are we planning campuses? Because Indiana University was one main campus with 7 regional campuses. So how was that happening? So I ended up meeting the guy who was dealing with that in central administration. And that led me to apply for my next degree, which was in city and regional planning, which I got at Ohio State University. And with that degree, I was then hired to go to New York to run that New York City Regional Center for Lifelong Learning. But I didn't feel I had enough of a background to do everything I wanted in the adult education field. So I applied for a degree in public policy. And I had a good offer, and I went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. My ex-wife was very helpful in me getting my degree because we had a young child, and she allowed me some time each week so that I could go elsewhere in Indiana to conduct interviews for my case study on school-state finance reform in Indiana. My mentor Meredith was helpful in keeping me focused to get the degree. Well, everybody who gets a doctoral degree has some challenges. On the day I was to get my degree, in February of 1990, my doctorate degree, I had the flu and I was in bed in St. Louis. So I called the recorder's office at the graduate school at New York University. I said, I am to graduate today, isn't that right? And they said, yes, you are. But you know, we're not sure you paid your dissertation binding fee. And I said to the lady, well, about 3 years ago, I thought I was going to finish then, and I believe I paid the fee about 3 years ago. So she said, hold on, I'm going to go, I know what file cabinet to look in. Let me come back and I'll tell you what I find. A couple minutes later, she comes back. Well, you're absolutely right. You paid the fee then, but guess what? It's gone up. You owe us $25. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean I don't graduate? No. What that means is we don't send you your transcript or your diploma until you send us the money. After that, I worked on the north side in a community organization. And then eventually after that, I reached retirement age and I began to work in the tax field. First at an office of a national firm called Liberty Tax Service. And then the last 3 years, I've had my own business called Ronald H. Miller, PhD, LLC. What led me to adult education was a job offered by a New York State Education Department official in the spring of 1972. I actually was going to graduate with a degree in city and regional planning, a master's from Ohio State. And I had met a fellow in the New York State Ed Department the previous year. I called him about a month before I was going to really start looking. And he said if he heard of anything, he would call me. I didn't even have a phone in my dorm room. There was a payphone in the hall next to the elevator. So one night, I'm coming back on the elevator from dinner. The phone rings. I pick up the phone. It's this person from New York, and he says in a booming voice, Ron, how would you like to gamble? I said, where, with whom, and how much? He said, well, a grant fell in my lap today. You would be finding out where people in New York City can find learning opportunities beyond high school. And I'd like to fly you east in about 3 or 4 weeks, and let's talk about it. So I moved from Ohio State to New York. Once I started working in this, what we called the New York City Regional Center for Lifelong Learning, I was involved with a number of national adult education organizations, and I went quarterly to meetings in Washington, D.C. Around the table were organizations like the National Education Association and others of that nature. I created a data committee because we did not really have good statistics on our participation at all levels. And I had been talking with the National Center for Education Statistics, a part of the U.S. Department of Education. And I said, we really don't have a great deal of good information on this stuff. That led me to being asked by the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems in Boulder, Colorado, to create a national task force to advise that organization on how to create in their management information system for higher education, how would you code adult education activities? I asked the organizations in the coalition to nominate people, and I had a really outstanding group of people, including a very famous professor by the name of Alan Knox, who at that time was at the University of Illinois. This task force of about 12 people over the course of a year or two created a coding structure for those specific activities. It was put in 1978. We're now 41 years later. It still exists. My big personal achievement is my singing. The second Friday night of every month at my temple, Temple Emmanuel in St. Louis, Missouri, I have been singing a version of what's called the priestly blessing. And I do that for birthdays and anniversary people who are having those events that month. It has become so popular, I have become a very, very strong fixture of the temple in that volunteer role. And it not only brings those people happiness, it brings me an incredible amount of satisfaction. If I had to summarize my life in one word, I would choose performer. And the reason I would choose performer is that I have a long history of getting the job done, whatever the job is. And I have countless examples. Just to name one or two, created from scratch a card file system to tell people in New York City where to find learning in over 600 categories with over 20,000 courses, 550 providers. The way I got the information was kind of interesting. Colleges and providers create catalogs to market their wares to people. But I said to these providers, if you want me to help you, I have to have your galley proofs. I can't wait till you have your finished catalog. By then, it's very close to enrollment time. That doesn't give me time to process the information. So I got my providers to do that. And it was very successful. I will be leaving my legacy for my grandchildren. I have 2 of them, a boy and a girl. And of course, I'll be leaving it for my son, Joel Miller, his wife, Sar Miller, my girlfriend, Linda Smith, my ex-wife, Lee Braff, and others who know me. The lesson I would pass on to future generations is don't reinvent the wheel if you know what the wheel is. I found this out in a very interesting conversation with a very well-known institutional researcher at the college level called John Dale Russell. He explained to me in the early 70s that higher education has been a cycle of relearning certain truths about how colleges work, and that each generation has to put their own little spin or twist or polish on how they do it. But if you strip it all, there's a lot of commonality. So my advice is figure out the continuity, and if you need to make some changes to it, feel free.